I'm Tania Pattison. I'm the author of the second edition and also the first edition of Critical Reading. And I'm really looking forward to telling you a little bit about this new version, what's new, what's different, what's still the same. So, what I want to cover here is, first of all, how this book came about. I want to say a little bit about what critical reading is, because it's not always what your students might think it is, and talk about why it's important. For people who are familiar with the first edition, I'll say a few words about what we've changed and what we've kept the same. And then I'll go into the skills that we cover in the book, the choice of topics, and I'll show you the various components of each unit. There are 10 main units in the book, plus an introduction, plus a review, so 12 in total. And for the most part, they follow the same pattern. And I'll end up with a few words about the digital component, which is quite new and different from the first edition. And I'm hoping there'll be a little bit of time at the end to ask any questions. So let's get right into it. So about 15 years ago, I was teaching EAP at a Canadian university, and I was given this class, critical reading. So I'm thinking, okay, critical reading, it's a hot topic, it's a buzzword. What am I going to do in this class? And excuse me, I've been dealing with a cold for the last few days, and I coughed my way through yesterday. So I'm hoping today will be a little bit better, but please bear with me. Um, so I went into this class, tried to figure out what my students needed here. And a few things came clear to me. First of all, students had the idea that if they are reading critically, they have to be negative. They have to look at a text and point out everything that's wrong with it, which is not necessarily the case. Critical reading is not necessarily negative reading. It's also not emotional reading. A student may read something and say, I don't agree with this because it contradicts my own personal beliefs, my own politics, my own religion, my own whatever's in my background. So they formulate an emotional reaction to the text when really they should be doing a bit more than that. They should be breaking down the text, analyzing it, and applying evaluation and judgment to that text based on a number of criteria. So I came up with a systematic process to show students what critical reading is and how they are going to approach a text. The other thing that I was doing at the same time was teaching individual one-on-one academic skills, having appointments with individual students. And very often I would have these first year students in undergraduate courses coming into my office with this assignment they've been given, write a critical review of such and such article, and they didn't know where to start. So my personal belief here is that critical reading is important. It's something that students can be guided in how to do it. They haven't necessarily had experience in this before, but it's something that we can help them to develop a level of proficiency. So as I was formulating all these thoughts, I tried to find a suitable textbook, and of course I couldn't find one. A lot of textbooks don't really delve into this aspect of reading in very much detail. So I came up with a list of aspects of critical reading that I wanted students to become familiar with. And this is the list here. We've got 10 key questions. The first few questions deal with the circumstances of publication. Where was the text published? Is it academic? Was it peer-reviewed? Who wrote it? What do we know about this person? What are their credentials? What biases might they be working with? Why was it written? Who was it written for? And new in the second edition, we have a focus on websites. If you come across a website in the course of your research, how do you know whether it's trustworthy? So we look at all of these things before really delving too deeply into the text itself. Once we get into the text, we look at things like, is this author presenting a purely factual piece? Are they giving opinions? Are they making assumptions? We look at the research the author has done. What can we say about this research? How extensive was it? What questions can we ask to evaluate the research? How valid are the results? Are the results generalizable to other contexts? If the same research was carried out somewhere else, would we get the same results? We look at number 7 is visual items, and this was a really fun unit to write. I enjoyed writing this one. And here we're talking about infographics, charts, diagrams, but also photographs. And we have a nice section in the book on how to read or how to evaluate a photograph. And finally, another new unit, non-academic texts. We know that when we send our students off to research a topic, they're going to come up with all kinds of stuff, possibly something from a newspaper or a magazine or somebody's personal blog. How are we going to evaluate this kind of material? What can be inferred from it? The third section is all about making connections. And here we are comparing the text with other sources of information, with other texts, with online material, with documentaries, with anything else students may uncover in the course of their research. And importantly, at the end, how does the text compare with what the reader knows or believes about this subject? What are the reader's experiences? You may have students who come from a particular background that is discussed in the text, and they don't feel that they are in a position to critique something that they're reading because maybe they're just at the beginning stages of their academic study and they don't feel that it's their place to critique something that's published or that's in a journal article. So we try to get across to students that they are a key component of the reading triangle. We've got the text, we've got the author, and we've got the reader. So all of this is included in the book. And these 10 questions here, these are the basis of the 10 main units. So I'm just going to say a couple of things about why students need this. First of all, we talk a lot about 21st century skills, which include critical thinking. It's also the basis for successful academic work. In a Western context, as we all know, it's not enough to go and find information, put it into an essay, and you're done. Your professors are going to want to see evidence of thought, of analysis, of agreeing or disagreeing, formulating thesis statements, supporting them. Students have to be able to read critically before they can do these things. Beyond the classroom, we're surrounded by information. There's so much information out there. Students need to know how to make sense of it. What questions should they be asking? How are they going to evaluate what is valid, what is not? There have been surveys that have said people who do well in the workplace are people who can think critically. But basically, we're showing students that they need to be more than passive recipients of information. They need to bring their own thinking skills to the text. And this is something that, as I said before, is not often taught explicitly. Students are given these assignments, write a critical review of something, and they haven't really been shown how to do that, which is not to say they can't do it, but they need, and what I'm trying to provide here is a bit of a framework, a model for the kinds of questions they should be bringing to what they're reading. Okay, so who is the book for? EAP students, students in pathways programs, colleges, universities, private language schools. These can be in Canada, they can be overseas. I know some people here are from a CEGEP context, and I'm going to let the sales reps talk later about how critical reading might fit into CEGEPs. But usually, or mostly students are working at a B2 level or even higher. I see this book as possibly the last EAP text a student will use before they go off into the big wide world of academic studies, before they start their degree in economics or business or whatever it might be. So I'm just going to say a few things about how we moved from the first to the second edition. A few things are still the same. The fundamental structure is still the same. The structure within each unit, we've got pre-reading, we've got authentic readings, and we've got a post-reading section where students are working on additional skills and consolidating what they've learned. All of the texts in the book are authentic. And as I said, the target audience, that has not changed. It's higher level pre-academic students. What is different or new, new and improved? I'm going to say a little bit later about subject areas, but they're all new, they're all different. I had to rethink what subjects do we want to include here. Some of the subjects or the readings in the first edition were looking quite a bit dated. There's one thing in the first edition about feng shui, and it references Donald Trump. And at that point, he was a guy who had a TV show. He hadn't been elected president the first time when that book was published. So that's obviously changed. Um, New topics, new content, a new unit on website analysis, new unit on non-academic text. We've really beefed up the pre-reading and the post-reading sections. Something we've done is the first edition had 3 readings in each unit. We have taken out one of them, and we're down to 2 readings in each unit. That third unit has not disappeared, it's online. So you've still got your 3 readings, but 2 of them are in the book, one of them is in the digital component. We've got to focus on creativity, which is another of those 21st century skills. We've really emphasized language as well. The first edition didn't talk about the academic word list, which we probably should have done 11 years ago when that book was published. So we've got a stronger focus on the language that students can look for example, to identify bias. The AWL is much more strongly emphasized. And the big thing, number 10, we have a much more extensive online component, which has this third reading, and it has a lot of other things as well, which I'll talk about later. So let's look at, yeah, this is what's available, the print book, the ebook. The marketing team are the experts here, so please feel free to contact them. So if we go to what's inside the book, I just want to do a quick run through of the skills that we're covering. First of all, a few principles that I kept in mind as I was writing. When you talk about reading, I find that very often reading is something that students are told to go away and do for homework. It takes time. You may say to your students, read this article by Monday, answer the questions, and we'll talk about them in class on Monday. I believe that critical reading can be individual, but it is also a collaborative activity. We want students to be discussing what they're reading, to talking about it, sharing opinions, helping each other to formulate ideas, to ask questions. We don't neglect the standard reading skills. By the time they get to this level, students have done a lot of reading, they've done a lot of skimming and scanning and answered comprehension questions and read for main ideas and details and that kind of thing. We don't throw that out. It's still important. But what we're doing here is going beyond. So all of our readings have comprehension questions, which have clear right or wrong answers, but they also have analysis sections where we're going to that next level. We're looking at the text from a critical or through a critical lens, not just what is this writer saying, but we're asking, why is this writer saying this? What evidence are they giving? What is their goal here? Why are they writing this? Um, And this is where students are really encouraged to formulate their own opinions, to come to their own judgments, their own evaluation of the text. And there may be no right or wrong answers here. You may be a student who looks at a text and says, well, I think blah, blah, blah. And that may be very different from what your classmate thinks. It may be different from what your teacher thinks. And I think that's okay, as long as students can justify their analysis or their evaluation of what the writer is saying. As I said before, we have a strong emphasis on vocabulary and language learning. And then we've got creativity and collaboration. And this especially comes through in the follow-up activities. And I'll show you an example of how that works a little bit later. So I'm just going to show you this table here. This presents the 12 units, the 10 main units, plus the intro and the review. We've got the subject area. We've got the critical reading skill. So we go through those questions that I showed you earlier. First of all, what is critical reading? What is it not? And then we talk about place and date of publication, the author, audience and purpose, and so on. Going through what's in the text itself to making connections, looking at the text compared with other texts, with other sources of input, and compared with the reader's own experiences. And the culminating task in the final unit is to bring all this together and write a critical review. We do have additional skills. After the two readings, we have a section called Go Further. And what we're doing here is presenting other things that are useful for students to know how to do. So we start with increase your reading speed. We've got some tips for that. And that's important if you're an undergraduate student working in a language that is not your first language and you've suddenly got all this reading to do. How are you going to get through it? And then we have things like annotating, paraphrasing, and summarizing. We have language building in the form of stems, prefixes, and suffixes. Unit 4, Health Sciences, is our website analysis unit. So we talk a little bit about identifying fake news and conspiracy theories and that kind of thing. How are you going to identify it? And what are you going to do with it once you have identified it? Um, Unit 7, we look at AI generated text. This is tricky because I mean there's no definitive answer here, but we provide a few guidelines for what students can look at if they want to make a guess as to whether a text was written by a human or written by some AI program. So those things come after the readings, towards the end of each unit. Okay, let's move on to choice of subject areas. So I asked myself, what subjects are we going to include here? And I tried to include subjects that are going to be relevant to students as they move into degree studies or whatever program they're going into. So we've got business, engineering, health, architecture, computers, environmental studies, biology. And we've tried to find readings and topics within those subject areas that provide some vocabulary, some background knowledge for our students who are interested in those areas, but that are still interesting to students who maybe want to study something completely different. So it's sort of STEM focused, but it's not overly scientific. Just a few examples here. Unit 1, which is the second unit in the book, talks about AI in different careers. If you are going into medicine, if you're going into education, if you're going into business, what role is artificial intelligence going to play in those careers? How is it going to affect your own career path? Unit 3 is engineering, and uh, my focus here is things in the air, things that fly. So we've got stuff on how planes stay in the air, why turbulence is not a problem, are roller coasters safe? We have an analysis of a bungee jump as written by a physics expert. Unit 9 is the environment. And this is the unit that talks about comparing other texts. And we have a kind of a fun reading in here about imagine you're at a holiday dinner, Christmas, Thanksgiving, whatever, and your family members are talking about climate change and saying it's a hoax, it's rubbish. What are you going to say to these people? So those are just a few examples. And one thing I did in the book is I didn't want to steer clear of topics that may be a little bit controversial, that are thought-provoking. Students have used a lot of ELT books by the time they get to this stage. And one thing about ELT books is they do tend to be a bit bland. They're sanitized. There are topics that are removed or just not included. And I've written for other publishers and I've received lists of, don't include this topic or that topic or whole long lists of things. And there are good reasons for that. You may be selling your books in a context where you can't talk about certain things. Maybe the books are going to be read by children or used by children. So you have to be very careful about what you include. But my feeling when I wrote this book is that these students are intelligent, they're going into academic studies. They don't necessarily want to read more about hobbies or favorite foods in their own culture or festivals or that kind of thing. So we've got some sort of thought-provoking topics in here. We've got, for example, these are all true stories. The first one is from Spain. What happened when a disused church was converted into a skateboard park and with lots of color and lots of excitement? We've got stories about scammers. We have one from, it's from a Canadian newspaper. A scammer stole $500,000 from a lonely woman. How was this even allowed to happen? We talk about an anarchist community in Denmark that was founded essentially by hippies and anarchist drug users back in the 70s, and it's still there. How does it function within a modern European city? We've got our climate change reading. We have one about a prison. It's the Kingston Penitentiary in Ontario. And the United Way wanted to hold a music concert there to raise money for charity. But this prison has a long history of inmate abuse and horrible things that happened there. Is this an appropriate use of that building? That's part of the unit on architecture. The last one is a little bit strange. It's from Unit 6, which is about psychology and perceptions. And we have this study that says people who react with disgust to insects, to maggots, and that kind of thing, are more likely to be opposed to same-sex marriage. Why? It's in the book. So I haven't steered clear of these slightly controversial, but I think engaging topics. This is just an example of the Christiania one, the anarchist community in Copenhagen. So we've got the reading. All of the readings in the book, by the way, they average around 1,000 words. Some are a bit longer, some are a little bit shorter. But 1,000 words seems to be that sweet spot for presenting enough information for students to bring some analytical thought to without giving them pages and pages of stuff that they have to wade through. Okay, let's move on to, let's have a look at what appears in every unit. So all of the 10 main units follow this pattern. The first thing we do is we introduce the critical reading skill, whether it's identifying bias or evaluating research or comparing with other texts or whatever it might be. We present the skill, try to make this as clear and simple as possible. There's a lot of use of charts and diagrams. I've used the academic word list deliberately in these explanations. I'll show you an example in a second. But what I've done is I knew I wanted to include certain AWL words, and there's about 100 of them. Every unit has 8 AWL words that are deliberately used in this introduction section. So students are learning them, they're seeing them in context, and then at the end of the unit, we come back to these 8 words and reinforce them. We use language related to the skill, something that we've improved since the first edition. So if you just look at a couple of examples here, Unit 2 is about geography or anthropology. It's basically about people going to remote countries with the idea that they want to do something good for that place that they're visiting. Are they doing more harm than good? So the section that says author credentials, this is how we use the AWL. I've got this sentence here, whether the author is qualified to write with authority on the topic. Aha, authority is an academic word list. So let's highlight it. Let's give a brief definition. And then at the end, we come back to that word. Same as the word relevant. What is the author's job? Is it relevant to the topic of the text? So again, we define the word relevant and we come back to it later. Recognizing bias is just an example of how we use charts and tables to get this information across simply, concisely, clearly. And then the language of bias in the middle is an example of how bias can be expressed through choice of words. So, for example, if you say that something is unique, it's a little bit more positive than saying it's bizarre, even though those words have similar meanings. Or somebody is an enthusiastic manager, tends to be positive. Saying they're a control freak is much less so. So these are the kinds of examples of activities that we have in this introduction section. So we go from there into a section called Put It into Practice. And this is a short activity that is focused specifically on the critical reading skill. Before we let students loose into a full article, we give them a short task which they can do in pairs or in groups, just to really focus on that specific skill. So, for example, Unit 3 is engineering. We're talking about audience, we're talking about purpose. So we have two readings, which are basically saying the same thing. How do planes stay in the air? The first one is written by an engineer for engineers. The second one is written by me for people who don't really know anything about engineering and drag and thrust and lift and all those kinds of that kind of terminology. So what students are doing here is looking at each one and pulling out the features that make them written for an expert reader or written for a general reader. The next one is, let's go to the next slide, Unit 5. This is architecture, and the architecture unit is all about repurposing old buildings. So this is where we have our church that has been repurposed into a skateboard park. And we're looking at facts, we're looking at opinions, and the thing that I've brought in here is assumptions that maybe something, it may be true, but we need some evidence for it. The next example is about media studies. How are we going to evaluate a photograph? And we're looking at the technical aspects of the photo. We're looking at why it was taken, when it was taken. What is the photographer doing? Much in the same way as what is the writer doing with the text? What is the photographer doing with their camera? So the top two pictures are the Trevi Fountain in Rome, the first one being as presumably the Rome tourist office would like to present it as beautiful and romantic and so on. The second one is what does this structure look like on a busy day when the area is full of tourists. So that's put it into practice, short activities before we get into the reading itself. So when we go to the readings, there are two authentic readings, the third one being in the digital material. From various sources, we've got materials from Canada, the USA, the UK, Australia, and South Africa. All of these follow the same pattern. We've got pre-reading discussion and prediction, vocabulary work, and comprehension. This is all very standard ELT textbook reading materials. But where we go beyond is in the analyze and discuss section. And this is where we're applying the critical reading skill from that unit to the reading. So Unit 7 here is media studies. I haven't got the whole unit here, but just the first couple of pages. We start out with before you read, we've got vocabulary, and then we go into the text. And then there are these follow-up questions. As we said before, there are additional reading skills in each unit. And just to show you a few examples of that, the first one, what to note as you read. This is about annotating texts, which is something we often ask students to do, but there's not much information out there on how do you actually do this. So we've given tips on how to approach a text with a pen or a highlighter in your hand. What are you going to highlight? What are you going to make notes on? What questions are you going to ask? What are you going to underline? Just a few guidelines for annotating your text. The second one, this goes with the online material unit, how to identify fake news, conspiracy theories, and clickbait. This is only the first part of it. It's longer than this. But we've got examples of what fake news is, some some examples of common stories in the last few years. And later we talk about what to do with this when you come across it. And then the third one, where it says identifying AI generated text. Again, this is only the first part. We have 8 or 9 things that students might want to look for if they're wondering whether a text was written by a human or written by a computer. And we've got some follow-up activities that students can, ask ChatGPT or whatever they're using to write something, to create something. At one point, I tested these all out myself. I've got ask ChatGPT to write a joke and see what it comes up with. It's not always very successful. The next thing that you'll find in every unit is focus on language. There are 3 components here. We review the academic word list vocabulary that we've already looked at the beginning. We look at word families. There may be a vocabulary word that we're targeting in one of the readings. Maybe it's a noun, but is there a related verb? Is there an adjective? Is there an adverb? It's an opportunity for students to build their vocabulary. And then language in use is kind of a fun little look at how language is used in everyday life. So some examples of that. At the top, we've got collocations, which are so important. And this particular reading is from Unit 2. There's a lot of collocations in that reading, so we pull these out and we look at them. The one directly below that is the rhyme as reason effect. And this is, again, this comes from one of the readings, and it's the idea that if something rhymes, it carries more strength or more authority than something that doesn't rhyme. So if you see the expression, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, it rhymes. People are more inclined to believe that. So we look at examples of this. We talk about whether this exists in different languages. This is something that advertisers use all the time, coming up with little advertising jingles that rhyme. We look at words that have multiple meanings. And English has a massive vocabulary. There are words that have very different meanings. So we look at some of these. Words from other languages, and so on. And then finally, bring it all together. This is the final bit of every unit. There are two things here. First of all, students are responding to a writing topic that they've already seen. The unit starts with this writing question, and everything in the unit helps them to collect information, to formulate opinions, to address this writing question. And there are different ways to do this. You could do it as an individual activity. It could be homework. It could be a class activity. It could be pair writing. It could even be something like a class wiki or something like that, where students are posting opinions online. And the very last thing is independent projects, where typically we give 3 of them. This is really up to the teacher to decide, yeah, that would be a fun follow-up activity. They wouldn't do all 3 of them, but they might choose something to assign for an extra activity. So I'll just show you an example of that. So Unit 7, Media Studies. Here we're really getting creative. The first option here is to carry out a survey and then create a poster with different types of infographics, charts and graphs. We talk about pie charts and line graphs and that kind of thing, and when you would use each one. What are the advantages of each kind of infographic? One of the readings in here is about a citizen science project where people go out into their own environment and take photographs. So we have a suggestion to replicate that, to do something very simple that students can do. Number 3 is we've talked about how to analyze a photograph. What we're doing here is getting students to take their own phones or cameras, going to some local event, taking photographs, bringing them back to class, and working in groups to analyze each other's photographs and to see if they've photographed the same event, did they get the same kind of pictures, and what message can be conveyed through the pictures that are taken. So these are follow-ups. These are fun activities that students can do to consolidate what they've learned. The digital component, as we've said, there is an additional reading in each one. There may be teachers out there who say, I like this reading, this online reading better than one in the textbook, so I'm going to use that instead. They may decide to just give it as an extra homework assignment. They may turn it into a test. We've got our answer keys, of course. We've got online practice and test. There's more vocabulary exercises. There's more put it into practice activities. Where it says handouts, what we're doing here, this is not a 4 skills book. This is fundamentally a reading book. but we know that teachers may want to use this as their main book. So for every unit, we're creating a handout that has a writing task with some kind of writing skill attached to it, and one that has a speaking task with something that students can practice an aspect of speaking, whether it's interrupting politely or turn taking or something like that. So if teachers are not necessarily using a writing book or a speaking book, there are these extra handouts that they can use. Okay, so just to sum up here, what I see as the strengths of this book, and I really enjoyed writing this book. I've written several books for different publishers, and this is one that I feel really personally attached to. Um, I think it presents this systematic approach, which I haven't seen in other EAP books, that really prepares students for what's coming next, whether that's a degree or a diploma in whatever they've chosen to study. It could be a graduate degree even. I like the topics that we've got in here that, as I said, are relevant to students' future studies, but not so specific that other students are going to be like, what is this? They're going to be turned off by it. And topics that students can really think about and debate and discuss. I like the focus on language development that we didn't have in the first edition. And I like the flexibility, especially having this online component. Teachers can they can use this book in different ways. Whether they're doing an activity as a group task or as an individual task, whether they're using something from the online materials in class or having it as extra practice. There's a lot of potential um, for really using the book to meet your own needs as a teacher. Okay, so next steps. I'm just going to hand over to Chantal here.
Yes, so thank you, Tania, for this inspiring and insightful presentation of this unique book, second edition of Critical Reading. So just to give you a little bit of more information, if you wish to have further product information, whether digital or print format, I invite you to visit our website. So if you scan the first QR code, it will bring you directly to Critical Reading, and you can get more information concerning the product and also a full description of the product as well. If you have any questions, also please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Deborah. And also, if you're not sure who your representative is, then you can find out by with the second QR code. You can scan it, and then you can reach out to your representative.
Okay, thanks, Chantal. A few other things. I have a website, so please feel free to have a look there. I've started to write a few short articles on aspects of the book. Feel free to email me, get in touch if you have any questions. I'm on LinkedIn. And for anybody who is in Vancouver or Halifax, I will be going to BC Teal and Texel, Nova Scotia. I'm giving talks at both conferences. They're not the same as this webinar, but they will be using examples, using materials from the book, or just come by the stand and say hello. It's always great to meet teachers. All right, so thank you for listening. Thank you for coming. Thank you for bearing with my voice, which is still not back to normal, but it's better than it was yesterday, trust me.